This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Katherine Shen. We're looking at chronic conditions like ulcerative colitis, an inflammatory disease of the bowel. What it's like to live with frequent trips to the bathroom, infusions, and ER visits. In our beauty culture, bowel disease can make both patients and those around them uncomfortable. We simply don't talk about it. Then there's the gender divide. Women are less likely than men to get therapies for chronic illnesses, and women have higher rates of hospitalization for ulcerative colitis. Today, we hear from a debut author living with this debilitating condition. She tells us what beauty looks like for her and how that perception creates a life of joy even in illness. Ishani Surya, author of Ravishing, her debut novel that explores themes of brownness, illness, and the beauty industry. Ishani, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and congratulations on your debut book, Ravishing, that just came out. And as we mentioned, you write about complex intersections, being brown, being ill, and also throw in America's beauty culture while you're talking about it, right? So can you tell us about how these dots connected for you and give us an idea of what the story is about?
Absolutely. So the book is about two siblings, a brother and a sister, who are Indian American, and they are raised with a father who is abusive and actually abandons them. And so when this makeup product comes out in which they can change their features, the sister decides that she no longer wants to look like her father. She no longer wants to deal with the trauma that he put into her life. But as time goes on and she uses the product for longer, she begins to develop a chronic illness. And so for me, these themes have really come together because of ideas of how trauma can impact the body, as well as the ways in which that is unseen and seen in a variety of ways.
And so what is it like to be young and living with ulcerative colitis? Because I think we're talking about illnesses today that you can see and also illnesses that you can't see. What does it look like from the outside, and what is it like for you?
hmm I was diagnosed when I was 21. So I was in college. I was around a lot of people who I thought were not dealing with this type of illness. Now I realize that perhaps they were, and I just wasn't aware. And it was a difficult time for me because I looked like I should be able to go to the bar. I looked like I should be able to go on the booze cruise. I looked like I should be able to go to class, but I was really suffering. I was going to the bathroom 10, 11, 12 times a day, barely making it on the subway. I was living in New York City at the time. And yet I felt that a lot of my friends, as much as they tried to understand, couldn't because it was so hidden from them in a lot of ways.
Well, and this just reminds me too. One of my really good friends, she was diagnosed also in her 20s, and she was sharing with me. And it's one of those personalities that I really appreciate as I'm getting older, and just throughout watching her experiences. She was very chill about it, but of course, we know when someone's like that, there must be a lot going on inside, both physically and mentally. And she was sharing with me that she has a medical card that she keeps on her at all times. So when she goes to a restaurant or goes to a business that does not have public bathrooms, you can show that to them and say, "Look, I have this medical condition. I need to do this." And that is just one example from one person on what she has to do in her daily life
hmm
to what's the word I'm looking for? To treat it, or just to live, actually. And
hmm
so, going through that as a young person, how much do you think that has impacted you in terms of how you see how other people live, especially with the idea of what beauty means to society?
hmm For me, it has really accelerated, I think, my sense of empathy in the way that I learned to become empathetic in my 20s. I am a person who will scan the room, know where every bathroom is at every time. Um, and I am someone who deals with fatigue and sometimes has to cancel plans because I can't make them because I'm not feeling well that day. And so that's really expanded my definition of how other people might be dealing with various circumstances in their lives. But again, so much of this is considered unseen and often really ugly, right? People don't want to hear about these realities that someone is dealing with. And over the course of writing this book and also of being diagnosed with this illness, I became really interested in what definitions of beauty and ugliness look like. So, growing up as a brown girl in a predominantly white town, I had a sense of these white beauty standards. And I always had an interest in feeling like the other, and how do I contend with that? But when I went to college in New York City, I felt that was lessening. And then, of course, I was diagnosed with this chronic illness in which I had a new sense of, am I ugly in some way on the inside? And this is an illness that deals with diarrhea, with blood. It is literally not beautiful in a lot of ways. Um, and then when I was 25, I actually was hospitalized and lost my hair, all of it in the span of about 48 hours. So suddenly people could see my illness, but they didn't know what it was. They often assumed that I was going through chemotherapy for cancer. And so these shifting definitions have really made me rethink whether or not I'm comfortable with the terminology of ugliness as we use it. And I found so much beauty actually in chronic illness through community and the love around me that I think it's important that we break down these beliefs that if you're sick, your life must be completely ruined or look horrible in some way.
And I mean, there's so many moments, it sounds like, that helped you understand both yourself and others, not only within the community, but outside of it. Because I think you grew up in Connecticut, moving to New York. I
Mhm.
imagine that's a pretty dramatic change in terms of the
Mhm.
people around you. So tell me
Mhm.
about how that journey led to your, I guess, second journey into creating Kashmira, who's your protagonist in your book.
Yeah, so my protagonist, Kashmira, is living in a suburb. She's actually in New Jersey, but it's suburban northeast United States. So there's definitely some intersections there as well. And my secondary protagonist, Nick Hill, actually lives in New York City. And so some of his experiences certainly are drawn from my time in New York, as well as working in the tech industry, which is what he does. He works in beauty tech. So I think about how my characters certainly are very fictional, but are drawn from certain life experiences, particularly in terms of the chronic illness. And one of the things that Kashmira in particular has to contend with is she wants to look beautiful in this way where she removes any feature that makes her feel uncomfortable, and then discovers that there's no way for her to really feel comfortable in her body because she is experiencing this growing chronic illness. And then she really has to come to terms with, well, how do I sit in this uncomfortable body and make it comfortable for myself?
And her story is it's very much like a cautionary tale. I mean, are there any parallels in her dystopian world of beauty and ours?
I think that there are quite a few parallels, actually. I When I first started working on this story, one of the things that I did was I used the facial filters that social media provides us as a way to get into the idea of changing your face so fully. And I used them for a week, and I found that I no longer recognized myself in the mirror anymore. That was how powerful it could be just after a week of using it. Now, about 5 years after I started working on the story, we're seeing such an increase in Botox, in GLP-1 usage, and certainly there are medical reasons for using those technologies, but there's also a changing beauty standard in which people are forced to fit a very particular mold and may be dealing with other side effects that we may not even know at this time.
And so, with that in mind, sort of building on what you just said, and also talking about growing up in a very sort of Eurocentric community, how do you feel about how our society is promoting beauty and wellness today? You know, where do people with illness fit into it? Because prior to the show, we were just chatting briefly about, growing up in an era where we were sort of we were pressured because people on magazine covers look perfect every time, right? But now we are inundated by magazine covers in squares,
Hmm.
on social media on a daily basis. And I grew up in a time where I didn't have that as a young kid, but later on, that became part of my life. So I can't imagine how young people are growing up today, where to me, it's like, oh, I go to a supermarket, I see the cover. Cool, right? You go home. But
Hmm.
now it's literally on our fingertips. So as
Hmm.
you've kind of navigated the several eras I feel like we've gone through in terms of how we're exposed to beauty, what are your thoughts about how it has evolved and where do people with illness fit in?
There's a real intersection between beauty and wellness culture at this time. So you're totally right. We're inundated with videos about physical beauty in terms of your hair needs to look a certain way, or do your makeup in this way. But we're also inundated with videos about what it means to be healthy. And we need to be eating a certain amount of protein, and we need to be um, maybe going on an all carnivore diet, or just all of these ideas that are coming up within social media. And they are not always based in science, and they're not always helpful to each individual either, because we all have our own individual makeups as people. And unfortunately, I see that there's a lot of demonization of ill people through these videos, because it seems like when you watch this kind of video, the worst thing in the world to be would be to be ill. And I can tell you from personal experience that that's not necessarily true. I've had difficult moments with my illness for sure, but I found a lot of ways to navigate my life. And I feel like the lines of communication between me and other people have opened so fully. I've been able to show my vulnerable self and receive other people's vulnerable selves. And my illness has been the avenue for doing that. But it's difficult to see that reality right now, because we're often fed, if you're sick, that would be scary and your life is over. Certainly, I would also add that within the American medical system, that can be true for a lot of people as well. And so we need to add in the idea that depending on your level of privilege, it is possible that your life would be over, but that is from a systemic level, not necessarily an individual level.
Well, and I imagine still a lot of room for improvement, of course, but it sounds like a lot more conversation is happening. I mean, we're having this conversation today, right? More and more people are more open in talking about their experiences, so other people can, like yourself, and what you're doing too is to let other people know that what you're going through is not necessarily debilitating. Granted, the
Hmm.
illness is obviously debilitating itself, but you can still live your life. And kind of wanting to build on that and ask about, because you dedicated your book for all of the sick girls. How
Hmm.
important is it for you to be able to put that on a page?
I felt very emotional putting that on a page. I felt like this was a moment that I could bring so many people into the conversation who aren't always part of the conversation. And I've been grateful to be part of a lot of chronic illness communities, particularly online. And they have really helped me understand myself and my illness. And I want to give back with the book, and I want to continue to open these conversations. And I also want there to be a reminder that you may not be a sick girl now, but one day in the future, you may be. And this book is going to be there for you at that time as well.
Well, before we go to break, I would love for you to let our listeners know, where can they find your book?
Ravishing is available at all major book selling platforms and your local indie bookstores. So I would love for our listeners to take a look.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. You've been listening to Ishani Surya, author of Ravishing. It's a debut novel that explores themes of brownness, illness, and the beauty industry. Ishani, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, let us know if you're living with chronic illness and what do you wish people to understand about your day-to-day. Let us know, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. More than 3 million people in our country live with ME/CFS. That's myalgic encephalitis myelitis, chronic fatigue syndrome. Clearly, it is a mouthful, and it is also a chronic and long-lasting illness, one that could cause trouble thinking along with severe bouts of tiredness and difficulty with everyday tasks. The condition affects more women than men, according to the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention. And joining us now to share more about the condition and how politics affects our bodies in ways that we might never have thought about is Jennifer London, author of American Breakdown, Our Ailing Nation, My Body's Revolt, and the 19th Century Woman Who Brought Me Back to Life. Jennifer, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Catherine.
And so yes.
The audio here is maybe even worse than the leaf blowing out in the other room. So I'm just going to move and hope that that's better.
All right.
Apologies.
Well, leaf blowers are another topic of conversation for a different day. But I understand that you do have ME/CFS, which is what we are talking about today. What led to your diagnosis?
Well, interestingly, just like Ishani, I was diagnosed at 21 after a case of mononucleosis. And that happened shortly after I moved to the US from Canada. So I moved to the US to start my adult life. I was very excited and also very stressed. Came down with a case of mono for no known reason. And then it just never went away.
And that led to your book in some ways, right? American Breakdown. And so can you tell me how the two themes, alienation and your body's revolt, are connected, both of which are in your title?
Yeah. In the process of researching American Breakdown, and in the process of living in this body for all these decades now, I've really come to understand the whole feminist idea that the personal is political applies as well to our bodies and our health. And so I liked what Ishani said about how illness is demonized and how we have such a health culture in the United States that if you're not healthy, then like you must be doing something wrong. And if only you knew the right thing to do. I mean, people will give you advice. They will recommend things. They will not they have a hard time comprehending that you actually know a lot. You've tried a lot of things. And so we have that culture that personalizes illness as a personal problem. But in reality, illness is a cultural problem that is made worse in cultures that are more stressful.
Well, in the title of your book, you mentioned the 19th century woman who brought me back to life. So that woman is Alice James, who lived in the 19th century. So why Alice James, and tell us who she was.
Right. So Alice was the younger sister of the psychologist William James and the writer Henry James. And what happened was that about 5 years into my illness, I found a copy of her biography by Jean Strauss on a used on a bookshelf in a used bookstore. And when I started reading it, I felt like I'd found my soul sister. So she had an illness called neurasthenia, and the symptoms had so much overlap with chronic fatigue syndrome, or ME/CFS. And I began wondering if what she and I had might be one and the same. I'll say that I could never determine that completely, but what I did learn is that that my illness is a complex multi-system illness, and so was hers. And those illnesses seem to be the least well researched, the least well understood, the most pathologized is the word I'm coming up with, but they're stigmatized, the most stigmatized, because those are the illnesses that actually involve not separating the body into parts and specialties, but the system as a whole and how it interacts.
And you mentioned some symptoms. Can you share what were some of the symptoms that you were feeling that you felt like Alice might have been going through the same thing?
Yeah, the biggest one was fatigue. So she was bedridden through much of her life. Her symptoms started in her late teens. You just She had such a sharp wit. She was so smart and so funny. So I felt like I had somebody on my team that I actually would want on my team. And um, and so I'm lying in bed reading her memoir about her lying in bed, and it just helped me feel less alone.
And your experience also led you to another major move. So tell us why you moved to France from the US.
Yeah. Um, the morning that I got the results, most of us got the results of the US election last year, my entire system just started saying, get out, get out, get out. And it was strong and it was urgent. And it was problematic because I already knew my husband didn't want to leave. Um, but nothing I could do could quell it. I tried just like going to Edinburgh for a month, and maybe I would just like travel out of the country for periods of time. And there were just too many stressors. And my system, even though I'm not one of the most targeted people right now at all, my system felt under attack. And um, it felt bad for my health and mental health to be there. And I wanted the relief of being in a country that believes in treating people with dignity.
And what do you expect to feel differently, or are you already feeling differently in your body because of your move?
I am already feeling different. I do feel some distance from the terrible things that are happening right now in the United States. They're still happening. They're still terrible, but I'm not in them. Um, but also, like, I just went to the indoor. They call it the covered market here. It's like a farmer's market that's in a building, and all of the people who served me, the butchers and the farmers, they were all so relaxed and friendly, and and I don't speak very good French yet. They're tolerant, and one man said to me he'd already filled up my bag with all the vegetables. In fact, he gave me a free like cloth bag. And then he said, in French, he said, one moment. And I waited, and he went around the corner and he came back with what he explained was an orange that was red inside, so maybe a blood orange. And he gave it to me. And I just felt like that's it. Like it's that humanity that every single interaction that I've had with somebody in a store, and I've just been here like 3 days, but every single one has felt like there's dignity and connection. And just a small example that I learned is like when you enter a store in France, you say bonjour. Everybody does, and that just sort of that's a way of connecting and also connecting the dignity. You say it when you get on the bus. You say it to the bus driver. You thank the bus driver when you get off the bus. There's just an understanding of the interconnectedness and the dignity of all people.
Well, of course, we're catching you at a very, very early days, literally 3 days
Yeah.
into a new environment.
Yeah, so check with me in a year. I might have a very different perspective.
We will love to get an update on that, just because I think we don't really talk about how our physical environment affects our bodies, and especially not only physical but also mentally as well. Things that are happening around you or to your loved ones or to your neighbors and to your family, they all impact our daily lives, both in mind and body. I'm curious to hear about the conversations that you had with your loved ones when you were contemplating, eventually planning, and then moving to a different country. What was that like for you?
Well, the hardest one was my husband, who didn't want to leave and didn't want me to leave. And my husband part of the reason that we work well as a couple is that he is very steady, and he is just good at being in place and being grounded. And I love that about him. It helps me feel grounded because I'm very emotional and I need freedom. And so with the help of a couples counselor, ultimately what we got to, it was clear we weren't able to cross over. I realized it was sort of like a couple where one person wants to have children and one doesn't. It's not that there's anything wrong with either person, and it's not that it's not that that either person should compromise. In fact, it would be terrible if either person compromised. And that's how it feels for us at this point with this decision. And so we've broken up amicably and will continue to stay in touch. And other people have expressed, well, they've congratulations and the wish that they could do that.
Well, I'm glad you're able to have that conversation, because it's a difficult conversation to have, right? Regardless of your relationship, and it's great to hear the respect, it sounds like, the two of you have for each other. And as we mentioned previously, that hard conversations needs to be had, but there's hardly any conversation about how our political environment affects our bodies. And I think because France has universal health care, that was a big element of why you wanted to make the move. So can you expand more on that? Of course it's important to have that, but why, from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, yes, France will cover me. Theoretically, after I've been here for 3 months. After I've been here for 3 months, I can apply. And one not so great thing that France is notorious for is bureaucracy and long waits for paperwork-related things. So it'll probably be months after that, but then they'll retroactively reimburse me for anything I've paid after I've been here those first 3 months. I was insured in the United States, so I didn't move to France so that I could have health care. But the fact that France has universal health care is a huge part of my decision making, because when you live in a culture where people believe in watching out for each other, and I know this because I was raised in Canada and lived there from the ages of 4 until I was 21 and moved to the US. When you live in that kind of culture, it doesn't just affect the healthcare people get. It doesn't just affect it just doesn't just equalize people in terms of healthcare. It equalizes people in terms of everything. It creates it's sort of an ethos of caring for one another, and everybody's health improves, actually.
And with your experience so far, what are you taking away? I know it's still early days, but what are some of your first moments of thought in terms of you've moved in 3 majorly different places over the course of time? What are some of the major differences that you are already seeing?
Well, I do feel calmer, but it is early. So of course, I suspect that there's been research that's done about the stages of moving to a new place, and it probably starts with fatigue from the trip, which I have and have had and still have. And then it moves probably into hope and awe and joy. And then probably there might be a stage where homesickness and getting tired of things and the differences being less comfortable. And so I don't want to romanticize too much because I don't know yet how it's going to turn out. But what I do know is that France legally, federally, people are allowed 5 weeks. They're given 5 weeks of vacation a year plus holidays. Women are given maternity leave. Fathers are also given paternity leave. And so there are all these ways that there's a container that says we care for you and we care for each other. And I strongly believe that impacts how people feel in the culture and how they interact. And that so far has been my experience in this small city that I'm in right now with every single person.
And what do you hope our listeners take away from your experience? I mean, it's such a case by case basis, of course, in terms of being able to adapt to a different country or being able to move to a different city. What do you hope they can learn or just appreciate from your experience?
I think right now, in fact, I know the research shows that a very high number, I don't have the statistics in front of me, but a high number of Americans want to get out of the country, and especially younger women. Younger being, I don't know, it's like up to 40 something, wanting to leave the country. And I feel like a lot of people give up before they do the research. There are places you can go. It's different for everybody, which countries might accept you, which countries will work for you, which countries you would be comfortable in. I picked France for some of the reasons I've already spoken about, and its beautiful landscape and beautiful old architecture. But also, despite the fact that my French is very poor. So ideally, I would have liked to have been in an English-speaking country, but it's actually being, so far in this early stage, it's been fun to practice the French that I learned as a kid in Canada.
Well, and of course, your move is a major part of your story, but started off talking about MECFS and how you wrote the book American Breakdown. How important is it for you to be able to have this conversation out in the open, not only this literal conversation we're having today, but hearing from Ishani earlier, who wrote the novel Ravishing, talking about her chronic illness, and you wrote American Breakdown talking about your illness. Why is it important for you to be able to put it out there?
These illnesses are still so stigmatized and under-researched, and often patients do not get treated adequately or even respectfully by doctors. I would include long COVID, which has a lot of overlap with MECFS. And so I feel like it's really important for those of us who can to speak up about our experience. And I'm somebody who can, and so I do. And I'm really grateful for this episode today to spread the word more about these illnesses. Well, and for some of the things that Ishani said about how, you can have an illness like this, and there are lots of things that make it unpleasant, but it doesn't mean you can't have a rich, full life. And here I am in France, not an easy thing to do, to travel, to move to a different country when you are living with MECFS. And I've just sort of given my body the accommodations that it needs in hopes of preventing a relapse so that I can continue to do what I do.
Mm-hmm. And is doing what you do, can we expect your relocation story to turn into a book?
Yes. So I'm very excited to write about this. Again, it was not in my plan. It was not in my plan to move. And I'm still finishing my second book, which is about swimming in a river in Maine. But this, yes, I'm going to write a book. And in the meantime, I'm also writing, I just started a Substack about this move to France. It's called Recovering American. And I really am excited about the opportunity for me to look at France through the eyes of an American and through the experience. I think of it as being a recovering American because it's been so hard on my nervous system, and I think on so many people's. I want to give a little window into the possibility that where you live can affect how you feel. And I already know that, again, because I grew up in Canada and moved to the United States. I know in my body that I can feel different than I did living in the United States.
You've been listening to Jennifer London, author of American Breakdown, a book that examines the intersection of illness, politics, and stigma. You can also find her Substack on our website, ctpublic.org/where we live. Thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing your experiences with us today.
Thank you, Catherine.
And our listeners, if you're living with chronic illness, we would love to hear from you to see what kind of networks of support you rely on for help. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. There are all kinds of chronic conditions that millions of people live with in America. One of them is where the body's control system, the autonomic nervous system, malfunctions. That means patients can have rapid swings in blood pressure or heart rate. They could faint simply by standing up or get debilitating headaches and vision problems. Most of these patients are women, and for years say doctors told them it was all in their head. That's starting to change, in part due to a nonprofit, Dysautonomia International. Some of the top cardiologists and neurologists sits on its board today, and it's led by a lawyer turned activist who joins us now. Lauren Stiles, who is the founder of Dysautonomia International. Thanks so much for joining us, Lauren.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so, Lauren, you were a corporate lawyer in New York City, and then something happened that really changed your trajectory. Can you tell us what happened there?
Yeah, at 31 years old, I was working my way up the professional ladder at a great law firm, doing what I loved, and I got a terrible snowboarding concussion and spinal fracture. And overnight, I went from super athletic, healthy, young career girl to completely bedridden. And I stayed bedridden for 2 years as doctors struggled to figure out what was wrong with me. I just got sent for test after test and bounced from one doctor to another, and a lot of misdiagnoses along the way, but eventually found out that I had an autonomic nervous system disorder, which is also sometimes called dysautonomia. And I was really frustrated by that. You know, I live in New York. I had the money to go where I needed to go. I had good insurance, and I still couldn't get diagnosed. So I kept thinking about all of these other patients that have this, that are in rural places or in places, or people who maybe don't have the money to go to 20 different doctors to get diagnosed or more. So I kind of got mad, but instead of living mad, I was like, let me try to help fix this. And I connected with a lot of other wonderful patient activists, parent activists, and doctors who really wanted to change things for these patients. So we started the nonprofit, and our goal was to fund the research needed to change the face of clinical care for these patients, to get them better treatment and to train doctors so they know how to accurately diagnose it on time, and so that people aren't suffering misdiagnosed for years like so many of us have.
And because of your anger, I guess, right? It was so frustrating. I mean, we've had so many conversations on this show talking about various medical conditions and also how a lot of people are not in the position, as you mentioned just now, to go through all of this and to experience all of this and finally get some sort of an answer, right? You know, from your experience, because it took such a long time, why did it take so long, you think?
I really think it comes down to doctors do not get trained on this in medical school. And that combined with the fact that a majority of people who have the type of dysautonomia that I have, which is autoimmune related, a majority of the patients are young women. And so combining, lack of clinician education on it with sort of all the stigma that comes with young women who have chronic illness, kind of, if you're a 15-year-old girl and you go to the doctor with 45 symptoms, there's a really good chance they're going to tell you you're just attention seeking or you're anxious or you're trying to get out of math class, and so those two factors I think are the main reasons. So those are fixable, right? We get out there, we train the doctors, we empower the doctors who are good at this to train other doctors. We help them with funding and giving them any connecting them with educational opportunities. We empower the patients directly so they can advocate for themselves in their clinic with their regular Joe doctor to say, hey, this is what the guidelines say. Can you do this for me? Can you help me? And giving patients and their parents, for the young patients, giving them the accurate information on the right way this is supposed to be diagnosed and treated, is one pathway to sort of improving the patient care overall.
And so we've touched on several chronic illnesses today, and Ishani Surya, who wrote Ravishing, as we spoke to earlier, and then Jennifer London, who wrote American Breakdown. And now we're having this conversation about dysautonomia. It sounds like there is a lot more open conversation about these illnesses. So people hopefully are starting to become more comfortable to share their own experiences as they hear everyone else sharing their experiences. But another thread that we're seeing too, that data shows more women than men have these conditions. And in your case, of course, it has a long history of bias as well. So from your experience, do you see that changing? Is it getting better? Are more people talking about it and breaking barriers?
Yeah, I think it's still really, really hard. No candy coating it, but it's definitely better than it was even when I was diagnosed in 2012. It's so much better than it was then. That doesn't mean every single patient is getting the care they need, or that somebody who had it 15 years ago feels like it's better, because they might be in a region of the country that's not well served, or might have other barriers and access, but the sort of overall is definitely better. I think that patients mobilizing themselves on social media has been a complete game changer for pretty much every disease. Patients are finding each other. They're sharing tips on, like, who are the good doctors? Who should we avoid? What's the treatment that's helping you the most? What should I try? And so I think traditional medicine is worried about those patients talking to each other on the internet, because sometimes false info is shared, right? But I think empowering patients with the accurate scientific info and helping patients, guide them to those good resources is really, really helping a lot. And I think it's also maybe a cultural change where people are more comfortable talking about health issues now than prior generations. Because it's sort of, people have realized kind of everyone has something. If you live long enough, you're going to get something.
Well, I know you touched on it a little bit earlier about launching your nonprofit, Dysautonomia International. Can you expand more on why did you decide to do that, and how are people reacting to it?
Yeah, so I will be honest. In the beginning, I was an attorney out in the Hamptons on Long Island, and fundraising is a sport out here. So I thought, we're gonna start a nonprofit and we're gonna raise maybe 100 grand a year, and we'll send it to the biggest dysautonomia research center, and that's it. That's really what I thought I was doing when I started it. And then very, very quickly, we got overwhelmed with patients who needed our help, and we realized, okay, mission shift. We need to do something a little bigger, and we need to provide patient support. We need to train their doctors better. And we need to fund a lot more research than what I could raise in one fundraiser a year in the Hamptons, right? So we've funded tens of millions of dollars in research over the past 15 years. We have educated tens of thousands of medical professionals. We have right now probably over 250,000 patients in our support groups in the US. We have support groups in 80 other countries. We're working on getting more multilingual, kind of different languages, so patients in far off places can get the help. Even though it's hard in the US for these patients to get care, it's even worse in a lot of other countries, most other countries, just because the clinician education hasn't happened. And so, yeah, the response to the sort of grassroots effort to launch the org was amazing. We have a very engaged patient community that is, everyone that I know that has any kind of dysautonomia, like, knows we need to move this field forward. We need to get better care for everyone. And people are really committed to doing that, which is wonderful.
Well, we've talked a lot about too, where people or patients are finally finding community and people who understand each other, and also medical officials. But I also want to talk about their perspective too. How have doctors and medical officials reacted to what you're able to provide? The education that you're able to give to them through your nonprofit.
Yeah, I think we've been really lucky, and that there have been a lot of clinicians who want this clinician education content. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink, right? So there are some doctors who continue to say, "Oh, these patients are just annoying. They're anxious. They're hypochondriacs, whatever. So I don't really spend a lot of time arguing with those doctors. Like someday they're going to retire and I don't have to worry about them anymore. So I put my limited energy and funds that I have into educating the people who want to learn. And there's a lot of them. Like our events often sell out. We have, when we offer scholarships for young medical professionals and trainees to like come to our conferences, we get so many more scholarship requests than we can fund. So there's this younger generation of doctors, I think, and other medical professionals, not just doctors, like physical therapists, mental health professionals, occupational therapists. They, I think, understand that the traditional medical education paradigms are not capturing the full range of chronic disease. And they are pursuing other educational avenues as part of their training, which is awesome to see.
So it sounds like you have a lot of doctors across the board. Can you talk about a few of them associated with your organization?
Sure. I mean, our medical advisory board from the start, we decided we are going to be a very science-focused organization. We're not going to put out pseudoscience, trendy stuff. We're going to do like hardcore research and work with those people who are doing that. So we're really lucky. We have some of the top autonomic specialists on our board from Mayo and Harvard and Stanford and University of Calgary, Case Western. Really, really blessed to have all of their support. I think about when we invited them, like we had no nonprofit. I sent them a letter with a made up logo that was really bad and explained my story and said, I want to change this. And we've got some other patients and caregivers who want to change this and we need your help. And they all said yes, which we were really surprised and happy to see. And it's been a lot of great collaboration from these doctors. A lot of patients out there who have dysautonomia feel very let down by the medical profession as a whole. But there are doctors who are volunteering tons of hours of their time to do research unpaid, to see patients after hours because they know they can't fit enough in their normal day, right? To fund research, they're helping us raise funds for research. They're showing up at conferences and events. We're not paying them for that. They're lending their weekends to us, So it's very, it gives me like a glimmer of hope when I see that it's not all bad. And we try to find the good and amplify the good.
So I got about 45 seconds here, but I want to come back to the beginning where we talked about you were able to sort of find your voice from your own experiences. But oftentimes it's that first step that patients have a hard time with. Who do you go to and how do you ask those questions? So what advice do you have for patients like yourself on how they can do what you did?
Yeah, I think that if you are respectful to medical professionals and you speak from your heart and you in terms of becoming an advocate, educating yourself, read peer-reviewed journal articles. If you have trouble understanding them, try to talk to some other more senior patients who've been dealing with this a lot longer and kind of learn from them. But everyone can be an advocate. In the whole patient community dynamic, there's a role for everyone. We have a really big tent at Dysautonomia International. We want everyone to get involved in whatever way they feel comfortable.
Well, thank you so much for that. You've been listening to Lauren Stiles, who's the founder of Dysautonomia International. Thank you so much, Lauren, for sharing your experiences with us.
Thank you.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Sujata Srinivasan, who's our senior health reporter. Our technical producer is Dylan Reyes. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And as always, thank you so much for listening.